sure this is going to stay on. I brought new batteries just in case. Huh. Well, hello.
It's packed in here.
Yeah, so busy. So many people.
Well, you know, I'm trying to record it and make it available for a lot of folks, and eventually people will realize, hey, I don't have to go to class. Which, I mean, you know, for a lot of folks, I think that's a good thing. Obviously, I think face-to-face talking about this kind of stuff is best. But, and, you know, and like, this is a link to a 20-minute discussion between Sir Roger Scruton and, shoot, I know her too, Christine Hoff Sommers, right? And they're both favorites of mine, so that's a great discussion and very pertinent. But today we're talking about Locke. Now, where is everybody else?
I don't know. John Locke is the philosopher that Thomas Jefferson used as his role model when he was trying to construct the Declaration of Independence, etc. And it's not just that, of course. It's the philosopher that they studied in William and Mary College. So the philosophy that John Locke constructs is essentially the basis for the beginning of our experiment, right? So our nation. So when we go back to studying our foundation, our founding fathers of the government of the United States, and really quite a lot of the states, not all of them. I think it's pretty famous that the Iroquois Indians were kind of important too, remember? Their compact. So that's kind of interesting. But when we're trying to figure out, okay, so philosophically what establishes the United States, John Locke is the philosopher that we go to. So that kind of makes him essential reading in order to know what was his thinking on that. And does that mean that what John Locke says is true and correct? No, it doesn't, right? We could be critical of it, yes?
No, I'm kidding. No, you can't. How dare you form your own opinions?
Oh dear. Well, actually, I think John Locke was for forming your own opinion, so you can't just... Now you're stuck, right? Now you're pretty stuck. But, okay, so where did John Locke get his point of view? Well, Thomas Hobbes would have been one of his influences, but Spinoza was another one, Benedict Spinoza. So why Hobbes? Hobbes is an empiricist. He's the one that basically says that in a hypothetical state of nature, did we talk about this with Hobbes? In a hypothetical state of nature, I thought we might have, but in a hypothetical state of nature, it's dog eat dog, everybody out for themselves, right? Yeah, we did talk about it. And so we form a social contract. So the Constitution essentially is a contract. And we, the people, are the ones that basically form this contract. And the reason we're forming the contract is to make life better for ourselves. So we're forming this union in order to make agreements on how
we're all going to cooperate with one another to improve our overall lives, right? That's the deal, right? And so we sit down together and we discover rights that we think we all should have, but hey, if you break these rules, you lose those rights, right? So that's the contract, right? Now, where Locke comes along and changes things is he doesn't think that the main reason we form the contract is for security. For Hobbes, the main reason we have a contract is because it's a dog-eat-dog world where everybody's out to just rob, take whatever they want, etc. So it's a miserable kind of situation. We have to have some kind of security. So we say, okay, well, we want absolute security, so we end up giving all of our rights to a monarch who's going to execute anyone that breaks the rules. Right? The executive, right? Chopping off of heads, right? Becomes the executive's position, right?
With that, I mean, like, it doesn't make any sense just because, like, you look at wolves, they, of course, I mean, they don't have a social contract, but I mean, of course, they work with each other in order, and of course, they probably do make selfish decisions for themselves, and that's, but I think it's more of like a mob rule. Like, I mean, it's kind of like beforehand, it was probably more closer to mob rule. Whoever had the bigger stick and the most people was probably the one that was right.
Yeah.
And I think it's still like that in a way.
Yeah. Well, the thing, we could criticize his hypothetical state of nature. In fact, Locke does. Locke says, no, that's not the way it was. Locke says, no, it was really families. We have to have families. You can't grow up and be a human being unless you have a mom and dad, and they usually grow up in a clan of some sort. Every one we look at in history, except for Romulus and Remus, that didn't work out very well, right? Right, Romulus and Remus famously, were like thrown out, and a wolf found them and suckled them. Right. You're familiar with the Roman icon?
Only reason I know this is because I've been watching a lot of videos about Rome recently.
Yeah,
Roman Greece
Greek
mythology.
I don't know how many statues there are all over the place, but something like that.
I think it's a pretty cool looking statue, though. How it has just it's weird, but it's definitely interesting. Like a wolf just breastfeeding a couple of human children. I think it's a powerful image too.
Yeah, I don't think it would work actually.
No, I don't think it would, but I think it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, pretty odd. However, it didn't work out well for them actually, because remember when they decided to found their city, there were various hills, 7 hills of Rome, and Romulus picked out one, Remus picked out another. Romulus said, no, it should be this one, and Remus said, no, I want this. So Romulus killed Remus. So it's not really Romulus and Remus founded Rome. Romulus founded Rome. Otherwise, it would be Rhene, I suppose. That's pretty dumb. Remulus. Yeah.
City of Rhene.
I don't know. But I mean, the thing is, Hobbes is just hypothesizing. What would it be like? And yeah, we could criticize that and say, no, that would never happen. Even when Locke says it was probably family, and it just got too large, and so there had to be some kind of organization, and so government basically is a social contract designed in order to protect our rights, essentially, right? That would be his explanation for it. Well, that's probably wrong too. His hypothetical state of nature is wrong too. But in both cases, as I read them, they're giving us a kind of historical explanation for why government arrived. And the basic assumption that they both make, Hobbes first, Locke second, Rousseau is on a kind of a side, making the same kind of argument, obviously influenced by Hobbes as well, right? Is going to say that the people are the ones who decide how the government should work. So that it's the people that are the founders of the government. And that's totally opposite what had been considered the reason government was there. Government was founded from above. In all of the stories, in all of the narratives, God makes the king, actually it starts with the Pope, and the Pope picks the local rulers, etc. There wasn't really even nation states. This is actually the beginning of nation states with Hobbes and Locke. So to say that the government is there for the people, that is like a radical flip of the whole worldview. And that's kind of amazing. And by the way, in most places in the world, it still isn't like that. There's a lot of places where people think you're nuts for thinking that that might be the reason why governments are instituted among men, right? It's, for one thing, they don't think highly of men, usually. They think men are relatively stupid. And so they have a hierarchical view of nature. And so they think the elite are the ones that should rule, obviously. Americans say, no, we all ought to vote on it.
Yeah.
Right?
I can understand where, someone with power comes in and they're saying, okay, you guys follow me, I can understand that all. But I think, and then there's also people who follow Lord, and they're like, okay, we elect you to power, and I think it happens naturally on both sides. Like, a lot of people don't, just try to become mayor or something. I mean, those who feel like they are capable of leading, or who feel powerful, do try to go into those positions, and we also elect them for that power.
Who's the mayor of Talkeetna, by the way?
The cat.
Cat. Well, not anymore.
Not anymore,
He
yeah.
died.
Poor Mr. Stubbs.
No. They get another mayor.
I don't know. Does it have to be another cat? That
They've
would
had
be,
two. They've had two cats.
yeah. That's really actually kind of interesting because it shows what Americans think of government, at least in Talkeetna.
It's true.
We don't need no stinking badges, says, the character in Blazing Saddles. No, if you've never seen Blazing Saddles, Americans, there are, have you heard of the individuals that think of themselves as sovereign? Yes? No? We've had people at the cars handing out brochures and stuff. They basically argue that the federal government has no rights over them, that they cannot be charged taxes, they don't have to follow laws. So they usually have a house out in the woods, they usually have weapons, and they usually set up perimeter defenses and things. You familiar with this? Yes? How do you spell blood? Oh. I'm in the wrong place. So this book came out, September 2017. The author, Bill Fulton, was the guy who ran the hunting goods store. He didn't sell weapons, but he sold clothing, hunting, camping gear, things of that sort, down in not the Muldoon area, but downtown Anchorage, right? You familiar with that at all? So he sold all sorts of stuff that the people who like to think of themselves as sovereign, independent people buy, apart from their weapons and things of that sort. So he ended up becoming a good friend with a lot of them and started working as an undercover agent for the FBI to investigate their organizations. Right? Are you familiar with this? And the one, Cox, the anti-government militia, right, who was in Fairbanks, invited him in as a member, and he went to their organizational meetings and stuff, and basically then turned in all the information to the FBI, who then put Cox on trial, found him guilty, and he's in jail now. And by the way, Bill Fulton had to flee the state, as you can imagine, right? So no one knows where he is, which is kind of interesting. Although, if you go on Facebook, I'm a friend. I read the book and I friended him. And in fact, I know the co-author, Jeannie Devon. So that's good. She's the real author. The book has a lot of uses on every page of the F word, if you're familiar with that. And so I think between him and Jeannie, he mostly filled in the F word wherever it needed to be, and she wrote the rest of it. That's my guess.
It's like Ireland.
Pardon?
Ireland, is that what it said?
Ireland?
Lives in somewhere Ireland, I think. I can't quite read it.
Ah, yes, well, I'm sure that's wrong.
Totally.
You got to put something there,
Yeah.
so that's just hilarious. But so, yeah, he had a lot of friends in the store. Mostly they were attractive to soldiers that had just gotten out of the military and were in need of help to kind of stabilize their lives afterwards and so on. So he had about 5 or 6 different guys that were part of the team. He was also, he ran a business, a protection business, and one of the things he ended up doing was being a bodyguard for other people. Joe Miller was campaigning, if you remember, for governor, and Bill Fulton and his team were his bodyguards, hired by Joe Miller to be his bodyguards. And at one meeting, the Anchorage Daily News reporters that were there were trying to get in to ask questions, and Bill Fulton tackled the reporter and put handcuffs on him and wouldn't release him and everything. So that became quite an issue. As you recall, he wasn't running for governor, I'm sorry, he was running for senator, right? And in fact, he won the Republican nomination for senator, and Lisa Murkowski, lost it. Do you remember? And so she had to run separately as an independent, and as we all know, she ended up winning that. But so Bill Fulton was involved in that particular group, and of course that was one of the things, if you remember Joe Miller, his position on a lot of that was in agreement with a lot of the radicals that felt like, that the federal government had no right to tax people, to make laws and make everyone follow them, to make your children go to their schools and all of that stuff. So that's pretty radical.
I think forcing children to go to school, like when it probably first happened, was considered radical.
It was. And this is the place where that happened. I mean, the United States, where that happened. And that's, again, Jefferson. When we think about Thomas Jefferson, if you think of what their understanding of government and how it can function, how we can have representatives and have a democracy or a republic. Are we a republic or a democracy? Or both? Constitutional republic with democratically elected representatives. Does that sound about right? Yes. Of course, we have an electoral college whose job it is to actually decide who gets to be president based on who we elect to be our representatives to the electoral college, right? Is that all fun? Sounds pretty complex, right? But for Jefferson, the classical way of understanding the types of government is to say that you have three basic types of government. So you have the rule of one. So you can have a monarch, which would be the enlightened monarch. So for Aristotle, that's the most efficient, best kind of government. Is when you have an enlightened monarch whose will is coincidental with the best interest of the country or the nation, and he's brilliant, or she is brilliant. So she wants what's best for the whole country, and she doesn't have to argue with anybody. She probably has advisors, and that's why she's brilliant, because she has really brilliant advisors. And she makes the right decisions right away. So that's very efficient, very effective, right? So that's the best kind of government. Trouble is you could also have the rule of one where you end up with an idiot instead, who insists on doing things, has all the power, but for one reason or another has become an idiot and does totally dumb things. So one example of that, I think, is King Lear. You're familiar with Shakespeare's play King Lear, where King Lear gets old and senile and starts doing really dumb things.
I read the script and I thought this looks suspiciously like the symptoms of dementia, which of course Shakespeare wouldn't have defined as such. But I thought, oh, well, I'll just have a look around and sniff around. And I have a family of medics, and my nephew, who's at medical school, looked up and found this article by a doctor analysing King Lear's symptoms as Lewy body dementia. So I thought, oh, that's interesting, I'll have a look at that. And then I met a geriatrician, and she pointed me in the direction of certain physical symptoms, which is actually the most useful thing, but also the mental state and whatever. And this particular type of dementia, Lewy body, is one that suffers hallucinations, and the hallucinations, I think, are always frightening, which is quite interesting. Lear suffers hallucinations. He sees dogs. He sees a mouse. He sees his daughters actually at one point. And he, I think it's related to Parkinson's. So there's a particular type of shake in the hand that the geriatrician pointed out to me, and which I found very useful because it just grounds me in that type of physical decay. Lear represents a very sympathetic portrayal of insanity.
So, Shakespeare play, King Lear, by the way, it's based on a historical precedent or myth. Anybody familiar with the swans of Lear? No? It's kind of famous. Spelled differently. It's L-I-R. Nope.
The story of the Children of Lear. Our story begins with the 5 kings of the Tuatha De Danann, who met to decide who among them should be their king. Their enemies were powerful, and they knew that they needed to unite behind one leader in order to be strong. King Lear of Shia Fianna in Monaghan was a powerful and popular man with many.
So there's like an old myth. So that's probably the Lear that was the source of the myth that Shakespeare then used as a character. But he's an absolute monarch, and he goes senile, and yet he's still the absolute monarch, and so of course everything goes, as you can imagine, goes to heck. By the way, it's considered a tragedy of King Lear. And what's odd is, theoretically, since a tragedy requires the hero to do everything right, but still suffer in the end, theoretically, this cannot be an actual classical tragedy, because Lear doesn't do everything right, he does everything wrong, which actually is the rule for how something could be a classical comedy.
You could be perceiving it as like correct though.
Shakespeare did redefine a lot of the classic tragedy, though, because like you look at Romeo and Juliet in the same manner.
Same thing.
Romeo, and they did nothing right, kind of deal. Like
Right.
they barely did anything right, and it's one of the classic. It's considered one of the most well-known tragedies of all time. So
Do we even have tragedies anymore?
I mean, they become a lot less common. I can't think of any of that in
Americans
Western.
hate them, right?
What?
Americans hate tragedy.
Western culture really doesn't like tragedies. I believe a lot of like animes that have really good tragedies. But that's
Anime?
Anime? Like Japanese cartoons.
Yeah. The only one I'm familiar with is, what's the one where like the girl gets on the train and there's this, like a spirit?
Spirited Away? Is that what it's
Spirited Away.
Spirited Away, that one was good.
That one's,
I don't know that one.
yeah, that's the only one I'm familiar with.
Yeah, Western culture is kind of straight away from classic tragedy outlook.
Yeah. Well, so the trouble with a monarchy is it can slip so easily into horrible. So that's a problem. The second kind is where you have the rule of kind of a group. I'll put many, but not all.
Maybe?
A few, yeah, a few I guess would be better. But it's a group. So like a committee, you know, it depends on how big a group you feel like makes sense. But this, by the way, in the classic sense is the Aristoi, the best, right? So for Aristotle, the best, and he meant the intelligent, the ones that are students of the world, that are politically astute and who know really what the best choices are. The advantage here, so the same thing that would go to make this an enlightened monarch is this is an enlightened group, right? And the advantage here is they have checks and balances on one another. So if one goes nuts, you know, they can say, okay, time for you to take a rest. You know, here's your ticket to Hawaii, you know, and we'll replace you with, you know, Joe Snuffy, who's ready to take your place, right? You know, so this can evolve along with the changes that typically take place as individuals age out or become corrupt, right? You know, things of that sort. The trouble is you can have lots of other kinds of groups. You can have like the rule of the rich, plutocracy. Well, that typically ends up making the kind of decisions to make sure that they keep their wealth. And that's not necessarily the best for the people, right? The religious groups, for example, in Iran, is a theocracy, right? So everyone in Iran that's involved in running for office have to be approved by the theocracy, or they're not allowed to run. There's only one party that can run for office in Iran, and you can't run on that party platform unless you're approved by the imams. So it's a theocracy, right? Theo and theologians, right? And so on. So there's lots of different kinds of groups. A junta, you know, like a bunch of different military officers, not necessarily a good kind of group, you know, because those officers know how to kill people, maybe to run the army, but not necessarily to run a good government, right? So you've got that kind of thing. On the other, so actually there's lots of different kinds of groups that you might have that turn out to be a bad kind of government that are ruled by a group. And then the third kind would be the rule of the people, which in Greek is deme, so that would be a democracy, right? Although the thing that Aristotle calls a good government is a polity. Polity, the same root as like polis, right? Which is the word for town. So a good government of the people. And the reason it would be a good government of the people would be because the deme have to be educated. They have to know the basic structure of how the government works. They have to know what the government can afford to do. They have to understand economics. They have to know all that stuff, right? And that means they have to be educated people. They can't be just the kind of riffraff that you would find on the street, right? Give everybody the vote. That's not what Jefferson meant, right? He wanted to make sure that the people that were members of the members, the citizens of the government were going to be educated individuals, and they also expected them to be property owners. Because if they were going to have an education, they probably also had a farm.
Oh, I shared a video. I sent the video. I just sent it through email. But like the whole video is just about it's 20 minutes long though, just so we don't. That's why I was going to bring it up and say, oh, but it's 20 minutes long, and I don't want to waste that much time. But it's about like.
Should I pull it up and share it though?
Huh?
Go ahead.
it's about let's see, like there's a quote in the comment section. Take the throne to act, and the throne acts upon you. And it's basically about how once you become a leader, you are bound to a lot of responsibilities in order to keep that throne. With a monarch, anyone who's in your military, your general, if you don't please them, they will easily take you over. And plus, if you don't keep the military pleased, then they can't control the people if the people get upset. And that's if you're a tyrant.
Yeah, well, and Locke was with William and Mary. So when, at some point, he ended up fleeing England because of the controversies going on there. England was going through a lot of controversies because of religion and government controversies. Remember, they cut off the head of King Charles. King Charles II comes back, but King Charles II, when he dies, it goes to James, and James King Charles II, James ended up being the Catholic, right? Oh my goodness,
I know it jumped back and forth for quite a while.
yeah, it went back and forth, so, well, there's more than one Charles II, so you have to. So James II. Okay, so his successor was James II. But he was deposed right here in the Glorious Revolution. So he was trying to bring Catholicism back and put it back into power. And of course, they had gone Protestant by then, so there was a lot of individuals, nobles and others that were pro-Protestant and trying to prevent that from happening. So they invited William, who was, I think, his cousin. They were relatives. And so he basically had to fight for his throne and lost. It's called the Glorious Revolution because the fight actually, I don't think anyone actually died in the battles or anything. He basically lost kind of easily. I forget how all that worked, but if you're interested, we could look it all up. But so William comes to England. He was William of Orange initially. The most I know about William of Orange was that he was the hero, or one of the heroes, in the book The Black Tulip by Dumas. Do you read crazy books by Alexander Dumas? He also wrote The Three Musketeers, right? A couple other books. The Man in the Iron Mask, did you write that one too?
I think so. Like, I know the Man with the Iron Mask is it's tied to the Three Musketeers a lot. Like, somehow they free him, I guess, and he's an interesting name, though. Dumas.
So the Count of Monte Cristo, the Three Musketeers. But he also wrote The Black Tulip. Here we go.
Well, the movie is about the Three Musketeers, the Man with the Iron Mask. So,
But in the Black Tulip, William of Orange is like the black, black trench coat, riding around on the horse, always kind of in the background, manipulating everything that happens.
so what was it called? The orange? Wait, why was he called orange though?
Oh, the area of the Netherlands is called Orange.
Oh, okay.
The
Okay,
Orange
okay.
State.
I was thinking he might have had like a skin disease that made him orange.
That would be jaundice.
No, the orange, orange was the name of the state. I don't know why. I never looked that up. And Mary was his wife, and actually, I think she was like the cousin of James II. Or somehow they were relatives. So it was like a legitimate excuse to like, let's bring him in because he's not Catholic. So so we'll stick to Protestantism. So he came over and so they had the Glorious Revolution. And you end up with a different family now in the kingship. But at the same time, they made William agree to a limited monarchy where Parliament was going to be kind of the joint ruler. And I believe that's pretty much set the stage then for the contemporary situation. I don't know how much of a change things take place over the course of.
Is England considered a plutocracy? I mean, you said that was like basically ran by the rich, and weren't members of parliament rich
Well,
before becoming members?
there were two houses of Parliament. The one is the House of Lords, and those are there because of their family birth status. If their mother or father was a lord or a dame, then they get to be the inheritor of that estate, and so they're the lord or dame of. I think it's mostly lords. Of course, I think I see them arguing. It's kind of neat. Have you ever watched them?
Only when it's interesting, they start throwing punches. That's not typically in Britain. That's like Eastern European, Yugoslavia, places like that.
Now the
Well, that was.
thing is, if I just pull it up, I don't know which ones you get. Because there's two houses. The other house, I think, are the ones that are the rowdy bunch that you end up with. They're the elected right off the street kind of thing. The members of the House of Lords are there because of their family position, and I think they're there for life. So they don't have to get elected. But the other house, you have to be elected. And does that make sense? Yes?
It's kind of fancy.
And I think it's like every 2 years or so that they have to run for elections. So and they're the ones that vote on the prime minister, so that England doesn't go and vote on who their prime minister should be. It's instead the people that are in parliament that vote on the prime minister. And that can happen actually more often than, so they could decide, our government's not working very well, we need to have an election, and then they do. Prime Minister May is the prime minister right now. So, I should know it better than whatever. But it's at this point, though, that William is the king. He's invited to be the king, but it's now a limited authority. So he can't do just whatever he feels like. Parliament's the ones that are involved. It's May, okay. So, and Locke is the philosopher who gives them the excuse for that. because in his version of the legitimating narrative, for government, is, that, it's for security, yes, Hobbes is right to some extent, but it's not only that. And so the king can't be given all of the power, because then the king could do things that are just not what is best for your interest. So instead of the king having all the power, we have to have the ability to overthrow the king if he doesn't behave properly. So that's part of the government now for England. And notice that that's prior to George. So that's, there was precedent, really, for throwing out the government, as well as arguing that we, the people, are the ones that are the reason the government's designed to do what it does, to protect our rights. Right? So that's one. So of course our Constitution didn't just show up for no good reason. It kind of step-by-step process as things went, right? Am I in the wrong page here? Yes.
They don't live in the city
Did one of
anymore.
you- Roger, welcome to AEI.
Thank you for inviting me.
It's so lovely to have you here. And you were recently knighted by Queen Elizabeth II, and I want to congratulate you for that. I'm not sure what I should call you.
I think you can still call me Roger.
Sir Roger, Lord Sovereign. I don't know. I immediately wondered about your father, your late father. He was from a working class background, and he had a lot of, let's say, resentment toward the upper class. And when you were admitted to Cambridge University, he was very angry. How would he feel about knighthood?
Well, he wouldn't be pleased, but and one part of him wouldn't be pleased, but another part might be pleased, because he was a contradiction. Like so many people who had come from the bottom, he felt that it was a great achievement not to be what he was, but nevertheless he must retain the loyalty to what he was. And seeing me blithely, youthfully striding ahead was intolerable for him, and I can understand that. But in the end, he was awarded an honour by the Queen at one stage because he was an ardent environmentalist who devoted a lot of his life to defending our little local town from the abuse of the developers. And he organised a local society for the protection of the town. And this work was eventually recognised with a little, the medal, the MBE, which was a much coveted thing.
And he was happy with that?
He had real problems with it, but he accepted it. And on his grave in High Wycombe, on the tombstone, it says Jack Scruton MBE, and that is, because we felt that does actually recognise what the deep part of him wanted.
For millennials out there, maybe my followers of the factual feminist are college age or younger, and they may have been in schools, universities where conservatism was denigrated or simply not represented. So how do you define conservatism and what are its virtues?
Well, this has been my life's work to define conservatism. At a certain stage, I realised that I was a conservative without knowing quite what it was. Let's say in May 1968 in Paris, when I saw all the students protesting on behalf of essentially nothing, not knowing what they wanted, knowing only what they were against, I felt this is outrageous that they should be listened to. If people's feelings are purely negative, defining themselves in terms of what they dislike or even hate, then they're under an obligation to find something that they love. So I looked around myself for the things that I love, and I decided that they are the things that I already have. Our civilization, the rule of law, the ability to close a door and be secure behind it. All those
that we take for granted,
we take for
the
granted,
benefits of civilization.
exactly, but they were threatened then by these crazy students who had all these benefits.
Yes, it was
Of
very
course.
much an upper middle class
Well,
uprising.
yes, exactly. Well, I observed it from my mansard in the street below in Paris, and it was a revolution supposedly against the
Occupy Wall Street.
bourgeoisie on behalf of the
No,
working class.
1968
I looked down
in
in the
Paris.
street for representatives of the working class. The only ones I could see were those poor policemen whom they were throwing stones
Yeah,
at.
well, apply to that too.
And we've seen this now on some of our college campuses.
Exactly. So my thought, anyway, over the many years that I've looked into this question, my thought is that the essential feature of conservatism is love of the actual, love of the things that you've inherited, and a desire to reassert that inheritance, not uncritically, but in the way that you do with your family, your parents, your brothers and sisters. You know their faults, but you love them. They're part of you, and it's your primary duty to affirm that love, and then work for any improvements, of course.
Now, when you say improvements, I can imagine someone from the left responding that, what are you talking about? Conserving? What if what you are conserving is corrupt, full of injustice, institutions where